So the colonies made the ultimate decision to break free from Britain. They issued the Declaration of Independence, explaining to the world the reasons for their split from the British government and the ideals they held for forming a new government. And they win the Revolutionary War, gaining the independence that they had sought. The question then became, what now? How would this newly independent country govern itself? This lecture will look at the United States' initial attempt at independent government under the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation were essentially the first Constitution of the United States. They were drafted and ratified during the Revolutionary War, and they spelled out the rules for the new American government. As their title describes, this first American government was a confederation or confederacy. This is a term used to describe a loose form of union, where the central government is relatively weak compared to the smaller units of government that are joined together. So in other words, the first national government of the United States was quite weak in powers compared to the individual states themselves. Congress was very limited. It did not have the power to tax, and it could only pass laws with the vote of a supermajority. As weak as Congress was, at least it existed to deliberate on matters of concern to the country. However, the Articles of Confederation established no executive branch and no judicial branch, so there were no institutions created to implement or carry out the laws passed by Congress. They would have to rely upon the states to carry out the laws, which they sometimes did, but which oftentimes they just ignored. And there were no federal courts created to hear cases under laws passed by Congress. Again, Congress had to rely upon state court systems. So the national government was very limited in what it could do. Nearly all the power resided with the states. States could even print their own money and set their own foreign trade policies. Almost immediately, this creates certain problems. Once the Revolutionary War ends, both the states and the national government, as well as ordinary citizens, are saddled with debt from the war effort. Also, a post-war recession settles in, making the economic situation even more dire. Under the loose union established by the Articles of Confederation, the states begin to conflict over economic policies, rather than work together to try to get through the economic turmoil. So why would the U.S. have formed such a weak central government in the first place? To understand the Articles of Confederation, it's important to get some sense of what was happening to the political culture within the states during the Revolutionary period. The spirit of '76 was a very real thing, leading people to believe that political power should be spread much more broadly than had been the case before. The states were seen as the place where the people's power could be protected. States began to loosen their landowning requirements for suffrage, giving a greater share of the population the right to vote. The middle class had been expanding, taking some political power away from the aristocratic class. And northern states began adopting laws gradually abolishing slavery within their territories. So people saw the states becoming more democratic during the period of independence. Now, it's important to note that the states were still a long ways off from true equality and democracy. The people who were experiencing newfound political power in this period were almost exclusively white males who owned at least some small amount of land. But given this new influence they had just gained in the states, they were suspicious of simply handing over power to a new central government in the United States. What guarantees did they have that a national government in the United States wouldn't end up abusing citizens' rights just as the British had done? It's for this reason that the first attempt at union through the Articles of Confederation gave so little power to the national government. So with the national government weak and basically helpless to create national economic policy, turmoil starts to ensue. States begin issuing their own currencies and engage in trade wars with one another. They often refuse to honor one another's contracts. So, for instance, if you signed a contract in Massachusetts and agreed to pay the other party a certain amount, but then you skipped town without paying and hid out in Rhode Island, there's a very good chance you'd get away with it because Rhode Island would refuse to enforce the contract that was made in Massachusetts. This is not good for the economy because it discourages all kinds of business arrangements that rely upon contracts spelling out the responsibilities of buyers and sellers. If you can't trust that the contracts will be enforced, you'll probably be hesitant to engage in new business activities. Another source of economic turmoil under the Articles of Confederation were state laws relating to debts that had accumulated during the war. People who were in debt wanted to pay back their creditors in paper money, which was generally easier to come by and was pretty unstable in value. Creditors, on the other hand, wanted to be repaid in hard currency, metal coin, which had much more stable value. Some states passed laws favoring debtors, others passed laws favoring creditors. This caused a great deal of social upheaval, as we'll learn about in a moment with Shays Rebellion. Before getting to Shays Rebellion, I just want to touch on one other area of tension created by the Articles of Confederation. This has to do with foreign relations. While the Revolutionary War had ended, it was far from certain that the United States was permanently safe from intrusions by Great Britain. The peace treaty that ended the Revolutionary War specified, among other things, that the United States would honor and repay debts to Britain. Britain, meanwhile, agreed to remove its troops from the Northwest Territories forts on the frontier of the United States. Basically, neither of these things happened for quite a while. The national government, under the Articles of Confederation, was unable to force the states to come up with the money to pay back Great Britain. Meanwhile, Britain maintained a military presence uncomfortably close to the newly independent United States. Further, Spain began testing the resolve of the United States, claiming as its own some of the territory claimed by the southern United States. This highlighted the danger of having a weak central government in an international arena dominated by European powers. The straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, and led many in the United States to conclude that the Articles of Confederation had been a failure was Shays Rebellion. Daniel Shays, like many other small farmers, had fought for independence in the Revolutionary War. Those farmers were often either unpaid or paid in continental dollars that quickly devalued. Yet, while they were away at war, their farms were being increasingly taxed to fund the war effort. So their reward for fighting for their country was to come home and discover that they owed back taxes. For a while, Massachusetts, like several other states, went easy on repayment of taxes. But when the state elected a governor much more friendly to the merchants who wanted to see a more rapid repayment of debt, the issue came to a boil. The state began foreclosing on the properties of farmers who were unable to pay their debts, in other words, kicking these farmers off their land. In response, Shays raised a small farmer army to resist, using arms to prevent courts from holding foreclosure proceedings. Initially, Shays was successful. Massachusetts was unable to put down the rebellion on its own. Other states were called upon to help, but they did virtually nothing. Ultimately, the Boston elite raised their own private mercenary army to help put down the rebellion. While Shays and his farmer army may have had good reasons for their resistance, their uprising caused something of a panic throughout the country. Many saw this as a case of mob rule and highlighted the inability of the states to maintain the rule of law. This was the flashpoint that led many to finally conclude that the Articles of Confederation were not working and that something had to change.